Well, our first guest is Congressman Austin Scott, and he will talk about all of that. He's in his sixth term representing Georgia's 8th District, who is a member of the House Intelligence Committee, has called for a national security damage assessment as a result of the Biden family classified document scandal. Congressman Scott, great to have you with us here on the Great America Show. What do you expect the intelligence assessment will find?
Yeah, absolutely, Lou. And thank you for having us. And obviously, we want to find out what he had. We want to find out if that information ever got to anybody else. If it got to anybody else, we want to know who it went to. And so we've had a situation now where it's very clear that we've got a problem with the way the executive branch handles classified information, whether it be Democrat administration or Republican administration, and we need to get the facts on this. And if there has been information that should not have been disseminated to a party that wants to do damage to the United States, we need to make sure we know exactly what it was and figure out a way to fill those gaps.
You know, I understand what you're calling for here. I do think that there is a trap here when we start looking at as analogous the situation with former Vice President Mike Pence, former President Donald Trump, the current president and then Vice President Joe Biden. I don't think that they're analogous. Do you, Congressman?
There's some similarities, but Biden had stuff from when he was a U.S. Senator as well. And so That's one of the concerns to us is how long has he been doing this, and do we even know what he had taken at this stage? So that's one of the concerns. There are obviously concerns with the family relationship that exists there, and I won't go too far into that on this podcast. But we're going to look into all of that, Lou. It is it's a situation where it's very clear to me that in the security of the country, the process of the executive branch is going to have to change.
Yeah, I think that you're to be applauded for calling for that assessment. I don't know to what degree we could rely upon a intelligence agency response because of the involvement of the IC in almost every aspect of what has been almost 7 years of political persecution of Donald J. Trump. We still have not seen an accounting for the individuals. To me, it's astounding how loud and clearly it should be understood by the American people. 2 special counsel investigations, 2 presidential impeachments, approaching 4 years of FBI investigations, and not one instance of wrongdoing on the part of President Trump has been discovered, revealed, or even noted. And meanwhile, we know that 4 consecutive leaders of the FBI, officials throughout the Department of Justice, have been found to be corrupt and to have indeed been part of an attempted frame-up of a president of the United States, as well as an attempt to overthrow him. It's that straightforward. And for us to proceed as if suddenly the intelligence community is not a corrupt enterprise, I think is woefully ignoring the circumstances that we know to be true and factual.
Yeah, well, Lou, let me tell you, the one thing that I hope you see going forward, I hope that when you see the House Intelligence Committee meeting on these issues, that I hope you do not see us discussing these issues. And if you want to go back to what you just said, for the last several years, with Adam Schiff in control, they had the Russia so-called classified investigation that ended up, being a hoax, and aptly named the Russian hoax. And then he would literally walk out of the SCIF where you're not supposed to talk about anything, and the press and the cameras would be set up right there for Adam Schiff to walk out and speak in abstract as if President Trump was doing something and coordinating with the Russians. And I think that anybody who looks at what the Russians have done since President Trump left and what the Russians didn't do when President Trump was president, and what the Russians did do right before President Trump got to be the president, that you would have to have a little bit of Trump dementia syndrome to think that President Trump was coordinating anything with the Russians, because under his presidency is the only time that Vladimir Putin didn't take aggression against the Ukraine. And so Lou, the double standard that you see in the mainstream media is very obvious to me. You look at the FBI's double standard. They used a tactical squadron when they went to Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was a facility that was guarded by the Secret Service. There is literally no reason to carry a tactical squadron with you when you're going to visit a facility that is guarded by the Secret Service. And then they turn around and they use the FBI with men in suits to go in and look for the classified documents at the Biden residence. And look, I don't have a problem with the FBI with the proper documentation going in suits and looking for documents. But when you use a tactical squadron to go after President Trump, and again, you use the normal suits in the FBI, if you will, to go look at the Biden residence. I mean, that's a clear double standard in an agency that used to be one of the most respected agencies in the world.
The reality is that we have a corrupt intelligence community and a corrupt Department of Justice and FBI, and we have to contend with it. And we have so many issues right now to contend with. I know that the Republicans in the House have mounted these campaigns to get to the truth, whether it be the Committee on Weaponization, whether it be Congressman Jim Jordan, the chair of the Judiciary Committee's investigations, or James Comer's Oversight Committee. All of that is to the good, and results cannot come too soon, I'll put it that way, because the American people are just sick and tired of watching what has happened to the nation's capital and the federal government. I want to turn to another part of the situation that we're facing. Over $100 billion now has been directed toward and on its way to Ukraine. We at the same time know that there are extraordinary relationships between this president and his son and Ukraine. And one after another are coming up almost weekly. Your thoughts as a member of the Armed Services Committee? We have over 100,000 troops on the eastern flank of Europe. We have an increasing commitment of weaponry going to Ukraine. And we know that we've crossed red line after red line on the part of Vladimir Putin. He's been straightforward. Aircraft, no-fly zones, and advanced long-range weapons he will consider it an act of war. How troubled are you by what is happening? And secondly, what is it doing to the readiness for the U.S. military to be watching all of this weaponry moving out of inventory and our troops being posted in Europe when the Europeans themselves and NATO are perfectly capable of carrying out the duties of that positioning in Eastern Europe?
Yes. So first of all, Lou, I want to give a tremendous amount of credit to the intelligence community on this particular issue, because our intelligence community actually, pegged the actual date that they thought Vladimir Putin would move on Ukraine. And let's go back to what we had said just a little bit a while ago, that Putin took aggressive action against Ukraine when President Obama was president, and we sent them blankets, and we did not send them any assistance from the standpoint of things that they could use to actually defend themselves. And then President Trump was in office, and nothing was done. And now that Biden is in office, obviously Vladimir Putin sees a weak presidency, and so he moved again on the Ukraine. I do think that the one thing that was done is the declassification, I think, of the intelligence so that the world could see what we were expecting to come from Vladimir Putin was a good move from the intelligence community. What's troubling about the intel that we had is that the President of the United States went on TV, President Biden, and said, well, it will depend on if it's a big incursion or a small incursion as to what the United States response would have been. Vladimir Putin is across the border in Moldova. The ambassador of Moldova was in my office yesterday expressing serious concerns about Russia's aggression there. They are across the border in Georgia. I personally believe that the Russian goal was to control transit through the Black Sea. I thought for a long time they would go for the port of Odessa. I think they intended to divvy up the ports among their oligarchs. And then every bushel of grain that was shipped out of the Ukraine, an oligarch would get a tax on it, and then Vladimir Putin would end up with some of that money. Let's remember, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. They produce about 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat for the export markets a year. They are a very significant contributor to our global food supply, and that food supply is now having a hard time making it into the markets, Lou.
Right.
So I'm very concerned about the overall situation with Ukraine. I do believe that we did right in providing the weapons to Ukraine so that they could defend themselves. And I do believe that there has been better coordination from NATO now than there was at the start of it. Now, Lou, one of the things that doesn't get talked about is the reason our NATO allies were reluctant to trust us is because we abandoned them in Afghanistan. And so in Afghanistan, that was always a mission that was by, with, and through partner forces, many of which were NATO partners, others of which were not necessarily NATO partners. But when the President of the United States decided to walk out of Afghanistan, that was a unilateral decision made by the President of the United States. It was in direct contrast to what our military commanders were advising him. And I think that as time goes on, you'll see that, General Austin Miller, I think you'll see General McKenzie, when their testimonies are talked about in the future, I think you're going to see that the president ignored the advice of his military leaders with regard to Afghanistan. Now, that led to the reluctance of our NATO partners to trust us with regard to the intel that we were providing in Ukraine. And so it is, actions have consequences. And Lou, had we been honest with our partners in Afghanistan, had our president followed the advice of our military leaders in Afghanistan, then I think that our NATO partners would have been more closely aligned with us at the start with Ukraine.
Yeah, that's an optimistic view, and I commend you for it. I do want to get to a host of issues, including where we are with the debt ceiling.
Sure.
Your judgments on what is going on in the so-called, the non-negotiations that are going on between Capitol Hill and the White House. But in that respect, we also knew, speaking of our intelligence agencies, we knew in the fall that we would be witnessing a conflict if Putin were not in some way impeded in his desire. We knew that clearly. The intelligence agencies of Ukraine were telling us that. Our partners in NATO were telling us that. And our own intelligence agencies were telling us that. We moved to February 24th. There had been 3 months past when the President of the United States could have stepped forward based on his own intelligence agencies and that of our strategic partners in Europe, as well as the Ukrainians themselves, and stopped Putin cold. We did not. And that is on him as well. And I just think that
Absolutely.
Can't get too much emphasis.
Well, he made the statement on TV that it depends on if Vladimir Putin has a big incursion into Ukraine or a small incursion into the Ukraine. And I can assure you, Vladimir Putin heard Joe Biden when he said that. And so, I mean, we should never allow any incursion into another country. And that's, the President of the United States should not stand up and say that, okay, well, if you break in and you only take a small piece of land, that'll be okay. But if you take a big piece of land, we're going to respond. A
ridiculous and irresponsible, reckless comment on the part of President Biden. Right now, and I want to move on, but this last question. This is now we're finding these bioweapon laboratories in Ukraine. President Zelensky ordering the destruction of all records on this one firm associated with Hunter Biden, as you well know, Biotica. Your thoughts about that, the importance of it, whatever claims the Russians are making apparently are being borne out?
I just believe in the truth, Lou Dobbs. I think our democracy is contingent upon the American citizens knowing the truth, and the destruction of documents is contrary to the truth being known, and so certainly opposed to the documents being told. I just, the voting public needs to know the truth, and so when you're getting rid of evidence, that is contrary to our citizens knowing the facts.
I will to that say amen, Congressman. Thanks so much for saying it. The public's right, the American public's right to know is right now under considerable threat. I want to turn to the debt ceiling, the debt, and where we are in the call by Speaker McCarthy for negotiations with the administration.
Well, let me, Lou, again, I mean, this is the situation that we are currently in is an intentional part of the Democratic agenda to create problems for Speaker McCarthy. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell went along with it, candidly. And what I mean by that is this, Lou. The President of the United States signed a piece of legislation. He signed the omnibus on December the 30th. If you actually pull the daily Treasury reports, we had effectively hit the national debt on December the 30th. We were at 99.9% of it. And so they had the choice in the omnibus bill to include one sentence, Lou, one sentence in that 4,000 pages is all it would have taken to change the national debt limit. They chose not to do that. And so Biden, Schumer, Pelosi, McConnell combined have about 150,000 years of political experience. And now they want us to think that they didn't realize that the country had, for all effective purposes, hit the national debt limit on December 30th when they passed the omnibus bill. So they had four choices. They could have done a continuing resolution without a debt limit, or they could have done a continuing resolution with the debt limit. Neither one of them would have led to this current debt crisis, as it's being called by the administration and Chuck Schumer. Mm-hmm. They could have put the language in the omnibus bill, again, Lou, one sentence that simply said the national or the statutory debt limit of the United States of America is $32 trillion instead of $31.381 trillion. We wouldn't be in the current situation. One sentence in 4,000 pages they could have put. And the other option was what they chose, which was the omnibus without the debt limit. So by omitting that sentence, they created the current situation, and now they're out there pointing the finger at Speaker McCarthy and saying, well, it's Kevin McCarthy's fault. Well, Biden, Schumer, Pelosi, and McConnell wrote the omnibus bill. They made a conscious decision not to include the debt limit that it took to fund the omnibus bill in that piece of legislation. And now they're sitting back and laughing and pointing the finger at Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans and saying, this is your fault. It's not our fault. I mean, they did this intentionally. Mitch McConnell went along with it. It's part of the Democratic Party's political agenda to create as many problems as they can for Speaker McCarthy without regard for what it does to the country. So we'll work through this, but the national debt now is going to be somewhere close to $32 trillion after the omnibus bill is funded. I would remind you, Lou, in 2019, it was about $10 trillion less. When I got here in 2011, I think it was somewhere around 11 or $12 trillion. So, you can't keep running $2 trillion deficits and think that the United States dollar is going to continue to be the world currency. And for most Americans who get up and go to work, 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, if the United States dollar is no longer the world currency, if you think inflation's bad and has been bad for you in the last several years, I can assure you the loss of that currency status is going to be a life-altering event for every American.
It well could be. And I hope that every Republican will, when talking about the debt, the deficits, the massive spending programs of this regime, will keep saying, remind people whose mess this is. And that is Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi. It is their mess. The unfortunate thing is that Mitch McConnell, in the most random of ways, but I'm sure well calculated by him, decided to facilitate that omnibus $1.7 trillion. And with that, he undercut the Republican Party viciously and knowingly, in my opinion. Your reaction?
I think you're absolutely right. And Mitch McConnell had the opportunity to insist that the debt limit language be included in the omnibus bill, and he allowed them to do it without the debt limit language in the omnibus bill. And so again, that's a conscious decision by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. One sentence in the debt limit and in that omnibus bill about the debt limit, and we're not having the discussion that we're having right now, Lou. We're having the discussion about, the next budget cycle and how we work to find efficiencies in that budget cycle, but also, Lou, how we promote economic growth in our budget resolutions. And so one of the things that concerns me as someone who came from the business community is the current tax rates, which have led to the highest tax collections in the history of the country. We revert back to the old tax rates in 2025. And so if you look at what those previous 2025 tax rates generated in tax revenue, it's significantly less than what the current tax code does. And you know as well as I do, a low tax rate levied on good economic growth and good economic activity is going to lead to more revenue for the government. And that is the only way out of this current situation with the debt and the deficit, is to grow our way out of it.
Absolutely. No one has been able to improve on what is mathematics, and the math doesn't lie. We've known that, and I've seen this over the course of my career, unfortunately, where the Republicans try to contend with all of the issues and the responsibility and the prudence necessary to run a rational fiscal policy. But the worst possible starting point is the debate over the debt ceiling itself. It is not the condition precedent to all that needs to be done to control spending. And the Republicans haven't won that battle once. I'm going to just say to you that, we really appreciate you being with us. I've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you'll come back soon. We always give our guests the last word, Congressman. So if I may, your concluding thoughts here today.
Lou, I think our democracy is contingent upon the public knowing the truth. I think if you look at what's happening, if you look at the double standard with the way the press, the mainstream media has reported the Biden documents versus the Trump documents, the way the FBI handled the situation at Mar-a-Lago versus the way the FBI has handled the situation with President Trump, I think if you look at those differences, that is very telling of one of my great concerns about our democracy as we push forward, is that without the public knowing the truth, I don't see how the democracy survives.
Congressman, you and I think have been in agreement on every single issue here today. I really appreciate you being with us. I applaud your thoughts there, and wish you Godspeed as you continue to serve this country with great distinction. Thanks, Congressman Austin Scott.